Let's talk about the Netflix movie The Silence. Spoilers. Also, probably adult content. So it begins with a bunch of people digging out this new cave that they have found somewhere in the USA. They break through a wall and suddenly these carnivorous pterodactyl bats fly out and start murdering everyone. They have apparently been living in this cave underground since prehistoric times. They are completely blind, but they have very acute hearing, or so we're told, but we'll get to that later. And as far as I could tell from the movie, they would not be able to smell a fart if it blew right in their faces. So they're basically the only sense that they seem to have is their hearing. Now, straight off the bat, get it? Straight off the bat, I have some questions that this movie doesn't seem to have answers for. How big is this cave? How many creatures could possibly fit inside this cave? How did they survive in there for millions of years? What were they eating? Because they're clearly carnivorous, so there must be some other animals in the cave, unless they were just eating each other the entire time. And they don't seem to have echolocation. If they can only use their hearing to find things, how do they not just fly into walls all the time? Because walls don't generally squeak when you're about to hit them. The entire American population, including the armed forces, plus civilians, a lot of whom, carry guns, because it's America, and they can operate giant metal machinery, and they have houses, and they have basements and bomb shelters and infrastructure and that sort of thing. All of these people cannot deal with an infestation of a bunch of plucked flying carnivorous turkeys. Here's the issue here. Humans, as a species, we're pretty freaking deadly to everything else. The very idea that we wouldn't be able to wipe them out completely pretty much in hours is just laughable. This movie should have been about us just killing all of them in the first few days, and then the rest of the movie would kind of tell the story of Peter. Just going on protests about how horrible humans are because we have now destroyed this incredibly rare, prehistoric, amazing species. This could have been a better movie. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's not get distracted. Let's forget about the monsters for the moment and have a look at our main characters. Our first character is Stanley Tucci. And yeah, I know that he has a name in the movie, but I'm just gonna call him Stanley Tucci. He's just your all-American guy who has a family and all that. The next character is his daughter, who is completely pointlessly deaf. Her name is, I think, Ali. I think her name was Ali. And she's doing the narration and all that. We're seeing most of it through her eyes. She also has a little brother and a pretty generic mom. And they also live with the grandmother, who is once again completely pointlessly dying of lung cancer and also smoking all the time, because that's badass, I guess. I have to talk about why I think Ali is a completely pointless character. So, she's deaf, and that's kind of the gimmick of the movie. It seems to be about the fact that the family can use sign language, but here's the thing. They don't use sign language in 95% of this movie. They just tend to whisper. I think that the Buffy the Vampire Slayer silent episode was better at using its gimmick of we can't speak. And then with the dying grandmother, narratively speaking, I'm really not sure what the point of the lung cancer is, aside from the fact that it just makes us care less about her because we kind of know from the beginning that she's dying anyway, so the stakes are not the same. There's also another character, it's Stanley Tucci's best friend, who they call Uncle Glenn, and Uncle Glenn is kind of like a manly man. He knows about like guns and survival and stuff like that. The family also has a dog, a Rottweiler, who is from the beginning, you can tell, completely destined to die, because you know that the monsters in the movie are these monsters that kind of like hunt by sound, and dogs bark. It's what they do. So, okay, our family hears the news about these things and the fact that they're kind of moving from state to state and just spreading all over the place, and they're very dangerous, and there's like pictures on the news of people being torn apart, and it's all very scary. So they decide that they should leave town because towns are noisy and therefore dangerous. I'm not sure this actually makes sense, but we'll just let it go, because if I nitpick at everything, we're gonna be here forever. So they're trying to leave town, but they get stuck in traffic because everybody has the same idea and everybody's trying to leave town. So they decide to take a shortcut, which is always a great idea, and they try to drive through the woods. But then Uncle Glenn, who's alone in the car that's in front, runs into like a herd of deer, and he crashes and he gets trapped under the car. So he's not dead, but he's trapped and they can't get him out because on this we're fleeing from the apocalypse journey, they didn't think to bring cutters with them. He's trying to be heroic and he's like, oh, you need to leave me, you can't stay here, you have to run. And Stanley Tucci is like, no dude, obviously I can't leave you here, but we're gonna leave for a bit, we're gonna find somebody with cutters and we're gonna come back and get you. So Stanley Tucci gets back into his own car where his family is, and the alarm of, I think, either the seat belt or like the door being open goes off. So by the time they turn it off, obviously it's too late, and it's attracted the monsters. And the monsters show up, and then the dog starts barking, and basically it's chaos and racket, and these things start flying in the car and trying to break the windows. And Uncle Glenn, who's still trapped under the car, who hears the commotion, decides to be a hero and sacrifice himself completely pointlessly. Might I add, every sacrifice in this movie is completely pointless, but basically what he does is he takes his guns and starts shooting to kind of make noise and attract the creatures towards himself. But the problem with this plan is that while he's shooting, the dog is still barking, so there's noise on both sides. So some of the creatures, you know, fly over to go and eat him, and some of the creatures stay and they're still attacking the car with the barking dog. So he gets eaten, which doesn't help the rest of them at all, and eventually Stanley Tucci has to make the difficult decision of just letting the dog out of the car, and then the dog gets eaten, and then it's all quiet and the creatures are kind of just hanging on the trees. And then Stanley Tucci's like, okay, well, obviously we can't stay here. He gets a lighter from the grandma and he quietly, how quietly you can do that, I'm not sure, but kind of slides down the hill to Uncle Glenn's car. Uncle Glenn is at this point dead, and he sets it on fire. And the car explodes because it's a movie car, even though real cars very rarely actually do that. But this is a movie car, so it explodes, and there's obviously a big sound and a big fire, and all of the nightmare bats that are kind of on the trees around them start flying into the fire just because it made a noise, because apparently they have no thermal receptors, no sense of pain, or just they're just flying into it because it made a noise. And Stanley Tucci is like, great, that worked, so let's all get out of the car. I don't know why they didn't just take the car, but they get out of the car and go on foot and, you know, start their journey through the woods. And they eventually find this house in the middle of nowhere, and it's surrounded by this very, very tall metal kind of mesh fence with like a giant gate, and when they kind of try to open the gate, they realize there's a bell on top, so the bell starts ringing, and like a few of the creatures start flying over, and one of them is attacking the bell. So, you know, they're not really attacking the humans, they're just attacking the thing that's ringing. But then the person who lives in the house turns out to be this grumpy old lady who comes out with a shotgun and starts screaming at them to get off of her property and shooting her gun in the air, which attracts the monsters, so they fly at her and they eat her. Just a few meters away from the gate, there's this massive, and I mean massive, pipe that they can go through that's not locked or anything. So it's actually incredibly easy to get into this property. So what was the point of the massive fence? Stanley Tucci decides to scout ahead, so he goes through the pipe. As he's going through the pipe, we see a snake next to his leg, but the snake doesn't really do anything. He doesn't notice it, so he just keeps going. And he gets into the yard, he gets into the house, he figures out they can just go in there, it's gonna be safe for them. And so the little boy is crawling through the pipe, then he sees the snake who kind of just jumps up in front of his face, and it's a rattlesnake. So he freezes, and the snake kind of starts rattling. The monsters, the nightmare bats, can hear this snake rattling inside this pipe from like really far away, even though they couldn't notice the humans walking right under them. And the mom isn't yet into the pipe, she's just sort of going into the pipe, but her legs are still outside. And because there has been a sound, the other creatures are now kind of flying over and they start attacking her. And when you think that, oh, maybe she's actually going to die, we hear this sound, which is kind of like an engine. We hear this loud sound. The entirety of this flock of monsters is flying into a wood chipper, which Stanley Tucci has just turned on. There was a wood chipper in the yard, and now it's on, and all of these creatures are just flying into it and coming out in pieces at the other end. Like literally all of them, they're all just going straight in there. What, how, I don't, they could have just like gotten a wood chipper and gotten like a lorry or some larger vehicle and attached the wood chipper to it and just like turned it on, and they could have just started driving around the country and like just getting these creatures killed. Can you imagine how cool that would have been? But no, they, you know, that's the only time they use that. But anyway, moving on, family moves into the house, but the problem is that the mom who got injured, she has an infection, so she's going to die unless they manage to get some antibiotics, and there's no antibiotics in the house. Somebody has to go into town. There is an actual town some distance away, apparently a walking distance away, and okay, obviously Stanley Tucci is going, but he's going to take with him his deaf teenage daughter, who I understand that she's the main character, but she can't hear. That means that she is less likely than a regular person to notice these monsters if they're around and trying to attack her, because they do screech. She's not gonna hear them screeching, she's not gonna hear them flying. But okay, I guess she's really badass. So they go into town together. They find this store or pharmacy or whatever it was, which has like pieces of dead people all over the place. And at some point they find the antibiotics as well, but they also see that these creatures have been laying their eggs inside of the dead bodies. How do these creatures find their eggs? A few creatures kind of come flying back and they're very clearly protecting the eggs. So it's not like they're the type of animal that just kind of drops their eggs just anywhere and leaves and just doesn't bother with them. They're clearly protecting the eggs. How do they know the eggs are there? There's no way of knowing the eggs are there. Anyway, Stanley Tucci and Ali managed to escape the creatures by setting off the fire alarm. As I said, like literally any sound works. I don't even, like they could have gotten rid of them by just throwing things on the other side of the room and the creatures would have just flown to the other side of the room. But anyway, they managed to escape and they're about to go home. This is, mind you, this is in the last third of the movie, where we get introduced to a new villain, who is this very creepy priest who's cut his tongue off, and he's clearly in charge of like this new cult, and it's not very clear what their religion or philosophy is. So creepy priest he's using kind of like a pad to write things. So he tries to convince Stanley Tucci and Ali to join him, and Stanley Tucci kind of obviously politely refuses because this guy's super creepy. So they leave and they go home. Oh, and the mom is fine now because they give her the antibiotics and she's all good, so that was easily solved. But a little while later, this guy and his cult members, who seem to be like a total of 5 people, they show up in front of the house and they try once again to convince the family to join them. Join us. No thanks. Oh no, really, join us. No, please, just go away. But the final thing they write down on like their notebook or pad or whatever is, the girl is fertile. You know, young female, somebody has to try to sexually assault her. Let's pause for a moment and let's very quickly talk about Stanley Tucci and his character in this movie. Now, I love Stanley Tucci. He's an amazing actor, he's charming, he's charismatic, he's interesting. I would probably enjoy him reading the phone book to me, and I did enjoy him in this movie, but not in the intended way. He just looks annoyed at everything. He doesn't look scared, he doesn't look panicked, he doesn't look heroic, he just looks annoyed. So it's basically like, oh, the apocalypse is coming, and Stanley Tucci looks like this. And then his best friend dies, and Stanley Tucci looks like this. And then he's about to get killed by these monsters, and he looks like this. If you have Stanley Tucci in a movie, try to use him a little bit better. So a couple of nights later, the family realized that there's somebody at the door. So they kind of look outside and they find out that it's the little girl or the young girl from the cult. There are the monsters outside and it's raining and it's dark and this is after all a child. So they let her into the house and they're kind of trying to ask her questions, but they realize that of course her tongue is cut off so she can't speak. Then they realize there's something weird about her or her clothes, I guess. And they find out that this is amazing. I don't know how anyone comes up with this. So she has a bunch of smartphones strapped to her body. You were saying that you wanted Ali because she's a fertile woman. Why are you sending another fertile woman and putting her in danger if what you want is a fertile woman? Because you seem to already have one. You have a young girl and there's no indication that she's not fertile. As soon as they realize that the smartphones are there, the smartphones all start ringing because they all have alarms that have been set for a specific time. So she's basically a walking like sound time bomb. So the phones all start ringing and that attracts the creatures who start breaking through the windows. And in the commotion, some of the cultists come in and they kidnap Ali and they start dragging her outside. The grandmother runs outside, throws herself at the people who are dragging Ali away, manages to separate them so Ali is now free, grabs onto them and starts screaming to attract the monsters. So the monsters fly in and start eating the grandmother and the attackers and just everybody. Ali is now free and she can run back into the house, she can get back to her family. Instead, she kind of just stands there for 10 minutes watching her grandmother get eaten. She's not even trying to help. It's not like she's like, oh my god, I can't leave her. I need to do something about this. She literally just stands there and watches for so long that the rest of the coaches are kind of like, oh well, I guess we can just grab her again. So they go and grab her again because she's just standing there. But of course the rest of the family comes after her, and this is our actual climax, guys. They have a battle with the family in the middle of a field where nobody can shoot because that would attract the monsters, but the storm is apparently covering other sounds enough that they can hear. That still makes no sense to me. And they're kicking each other and stabbing each other with knives and things like that. And the family wins. They manage to kill all of the coaches apart from the young girl and her mother, and the young girl and the mother are kind of just like, oh well, this sucks for us, I guess we're just gonna leave. So they just kind of leave. So Ali has made contact with her boyfriend a little bit earlier, and he was heading north because people had realized that these creatures can't stand the cold. So she shares that with her family and they're like, okay, we're gonna leave and we're gonna go north, I guess. So they basically reach this destination off screen, because I guess at this point the movie has realized that it's kind of overstayed its welcome a little bit. So they reach this destination completely off screen, and it's just this kind of your standard typical post-apocalyptic place that humans go to. And they know now that these creatures don't normally venture north, but maybe they're going to evolve, and we see one of the creatures flying through a snowy forest, and we see that it's laid its eggs inside like a, I don't know if it was like a white wolf, but then we see the creature being shot by an arrow. Pan out, we see who shot it, and I swear this is taken straight out of the beginning of the Hunger Games. So we see Ali literally standing there exactly like Katniss Everdeen with her bow and arrow, and you know, in the same pose, and we see her boyfriend behind her who is clearly posing as Gale, and that's how the movie ends, basically with Ali's last line, and she says in the narration, maybe they're going to evolve, we're just gonna have to wait and see who evolves faster. Should you watch this movie? Well, on one hand, it's incredibly stupid. On the other hand, it's kind of harmlessly stupid. So if this is your cup of tea, maybe check it out. Thanks for watching, I hope you had fun, and if you're ever in an apocalyptic scenario, take some cutters with you and please find a way to shut your dog up.